Welcome to the Wellness on Demand podcast, bringing you interviews with health, fitness, and wellness professionals, sharing proven strategies that empower you to lead a healthier life and achieve complete wellness. Here's your host, Garvin Reid.
All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Wellness on Demand. Today I have with me Dr. Michael Genkin, and Dr. Genkin is a certified podiatrist. Dr. Genkin, introduce yourself to our listening audience, please.
Hi, how are you? As mentioned, my name is Dr. Genkin. I'm a foot and ankle surgeon by training. I do specialize in all aspects of foot and ankle care. My main emphasis is on sports medicine. That's what I see most of my patients for and treat. I've been in practice since 2009, 3-year surgical residency in rear foot reconstructive and forefoot surgery. Basically, I'm in Manhattan area, treat everybody in the tri-state area that comes and sees me. 2 offices in Manhattan, in Midtown and downtown. And if you have any further questions, I guess there'll be a link to where you can reach out to me if you have any further questions after this podcast.
Definitely, Dr. Genkin. We will provide your link in the show notes so our listeners can reach out to you if they have additional questions. When it comes to the feet, it's easy to ignore your feet, right? We exercise, we do a lot of different activities to keep our body healthy, to keep our mind going, but no one ever really thinks of important activity to keep your feet healthy. And it's something, your feet is something that you use all day, every day, no matter if you're just getting up to run to the restroom or you're working on or walking all day, doing some type of physical activity. Your feet plays a big role in that process.
No, I would definitely, I do a lot of events and health fairs and different parts of different communities, and people don't really think of their feet as something that should be taken care of. And unfortunately, it's something when I do see people, they usually come in with a lot of pain or, some discomfort or some deformities that really, in essence, could have been preventable, or at least, the pain-wise aspect of it if they saw me a little bit earlier. But, that's something that people really should think about.
I agree 100%. In fact, I'll share with the audience that Dr. Genkin is also my podiatrist. And up until a couple of years ago, I didn't really think about like going to a foot doctor or foot health or taking care of my feet in general. I just was like, all right, whatever, they're there. I walk on them. I don't really think about them until I was injured working out and trying to be healthy with the rest of my body. It made me take primary notice on my feet and say, hey, what do I have to do to stay healthy overall, including my feet? Dr. Genkin, what are some of the most common reasons athletes show up in your office?
Well, I do see a variety of athletes, as you put it. There's some that are more athletic than others, but people generally, if they work out, they do have to, wear proper shoe gear. That's obviously very important. But when I do see people, a lot of problems that I see, the most common problem is definitely plantar fasciitis, heel spurs, which is basically pain on the bottom of your heel. There's also Achilles tendonitis, which is basically the back of your heel. It gets strained, and we can talk about that later. Also, things like bunions, which are basically just deformities in your big toe joint. Hammertoes, that's more concerning, obviously, for women more than men because of the shoes. And, different types of other tendonitis, which are basically inflammation of your tendons that are basically coming into your foot. And strains and sprains, that's very common as well.
So let's start out with plantar fasciitis, because I've actually had that. And until you've had plantar fasciitis and the pain that you feel as you try to walk around and just do regular things, it's an interesting process. Can you touch on that and how you deal with that?
Absolutely. So plantar fascia is basically a ligament. A ligament connects bone to bone, and it can be found on the bottom of your foot. It stretches all the way from the front of your foot all the way to your heel. Basically, what happens is there's a variety of reasons why this occurs, but a lot of it is overuse injury, where perhaps you did something where you're walking more than normal. Obviously, shoes play a big role. Flat shoes with no support, and a person does more walking than normal. That's a very common thing I see. And basically, what happens is the ligaments get strained, and possibly some little small tears, micro tears in your plantar fascia. which then bring on inflammation and pain.
Okay. And what is the general treatment or the common treatment for plantar fasciitis?
So basically, there are a variety of things that we can do. Obviously, when the patient comes to my office, I first do an x-ray to make sure it's not a more serious issue. Plantar heel spurs are common, but it's not the cause of the pain. Again, as I said, there's these micro tears that really cause the fascia to be painful. And but what I suggest is there are obviously underlying causes to the reason why this happened in the first place, which have to be evaluated. The most common issue that I see is when the person has either something called pronation or a collapsed arch, where your arch of your foot is either low or your actual foot is actually collapsing inward towards the other foot. So basically, it causes a biomechanical imbalance that kind of predisposes you to getting the fasciitis in the first place. And so what I try to do is, obviously, the first line is, rest, ice, elevation, anti-inflammatories, but, that doesn't really correct the underlying cause of your problem. So what I try to do in my approach is to correct the foot in a sense where you're hitting the ground slightly differently. I basically retrain the way you walk a little bit, to put in layman's terms, where you're not hitting the ground in the same pattern, which caused the problem in the first place. So if you adjust the way you walk, and this is something that can be done with what I do is physical therapy, obviously decrease the inflammation, but what I also do is we've got to retrain your muscles, make them stronger, and that's part of physical therapy. And also I do strappings, which are basically wraps around your foot and ankle, which basically force you to walk a little bit differently. And long term, some people do need custom orthotics. And why I say custom is because there are prefabricated orthotics, meaning the ones that you can buy in the store, but a lot of them are not really made exactly to your foot. So you could still be in the same gait pattern where it caused the problem in the first place. And for some people where the way they walk is not necessarily that bad, where it's more straight or neutral, they might be able to get away with it. But a lot of people that I see do really need custom orthotics or inserts to put in your shoes and to wear them every day, just to prevent long-term problems where, the fasciitis might go away today, and then in a year or two, or even earlier than that, it can come back even worse than before. And, over time, as it becomes more chronic, some people will not respond to treatment and might need surgery. So this is very critical, in order to avoid it. You really want to make sure that you are get full treatment where you're, adjusted, that you're walking properly, where this doesn't occur.
Oh, wow. I never thought it could lead to surgery. And the pain that you feel when plantar fasciitis comes on is no joke. It really does hurt. So as someone who is into fitness and athletic and trying to get into running, what could you recommend for me, just starting out in terms of what type of shoes to wear? Like you said, most people with plantar need custom orthotics, but if I haven't gotten that far yet, what type of insole or orthotics should I be using to ensure that as I'm getting into whatever my fitness activity is, it's one that my feet can handle?
Well, first of all, obviously, whenever you start a new training regimen, it's very critical that you start slowly. You don't jump in and go from 0 to 90 and expect not to be injured, because that's something that's very common. So number one thing, obviously, shoes do play a critical role, but I really want to emphasize that people most of the time don't stretch enough. And that's the number one thing. You really want to make sure you stretch all your muscles group before working out, especially the ones that you're using. And I'm talking about not just, a 2-second thing here and there. You have to literally between 15 and 20 minutes to do really active stretches and also warm up, because you never want to stretch a cold muscle. So pre and post exercise. So that's very critical. That's number one. Number two, with sneakers. Now, you really want to make sure that the sneaker has really good support. And what I mean by that, the shank of the shoe, which is basically underneath your sole, should be rigid, especially for running, meaning it has to, when you try to bend the shoe, that's a good way to, in the middle, and trying to fold it in half. You shouldn't be able to do that. The only part that should be somewhat flexible is towards your toes. And that's kind of critical, because especially with running, if your shoes do not have enough support, and these especially minimalist shoes or the ones that foam, that are very trendy right now, they really don't give enough support. And this is what I see in a lot of my patients that come in initially, where they do start exercising, running, or other activities, and they get injured just from the fact that the shoe that they wear does not possess enough support. Also, having said that, depending on your foot type, either you have, let's say if you have a high arch and you're versus, let's say, a low arch, where sometimes it's called pronation, where if you're collapsing inward towards the other foot or outward, which is then called supination. They're different, or neutral, which is where your heel is more or less you're walking straight. The sneakers have that specific designation. So especially specialty shoes for, like, say, running do have that designation when you read in about them in their description. So if, let's say, you are flat-footed or pronated, where your foot collapses inward, where you have a low arch, and you buy a sneaker for supination, where it's actually outward, that your feet are facing, that means your sneaker doesn't have the proper support for you specifically, and that could cause a problem as well. So you really want to make sure you do the research and find the sneaker that's proper for your foot type. Now, most people won't be able to tell that, so a good way is either obviously to have an evaluation by your podiatrist or podiatrist in your area, where you can get a full gait analysis and find out what your foot type is. The other option is if you go to a specialty store, they do some analysis, and at least they can guide you towards a proper sneaker. But anything, if you just buy on the internet without actually knowing what your foot type is, there's a possibility that you might have an injury just from having improper sneaker.
Oh wow! When I first started out working out, I did not know that. I would just take my old sneaker and be like, "Well, you're not old. You're now a gym shoe."
Well, that's another thing that you just mentioned. Your old shoes, and this is where I will always emphasize to people: you want to make sure that the sneakers aren't worn out on the back of your heel. You got to look to make sure it's not slanted one way or another, because people do wear their sneakers out unevenly. And in general, about 300 to 400 miles per sneaker. So it's usually ballpark about a year. That's how old the sneakers should be. Otherwise, you really want to make sure you switch them and change them out.
Understood. Well, that's good to know. And we've had this conversation before about, like, going to a specialty store where they actually look at how you run and kind of figure out what kind of sneakers would be right for you. You mentioned stretching earlier in the conversation, about stretching your feet, stretching your body in general and your muscles and warming up. How does one stretch the feet? It took me a while to figure out how to do that and to learn how to properly stretch my toes and my feet in general.
Well, most of the major muscle groups do originate in your legs, that they're basically coming to your feet. So the critical stretches are, you want to stretch your calf, which is basically your gastrocnemius and soleus muscle, which is on the back of your calf. That's part of the actually plantar fascia and Achilles stretches. And you can find a lot of resources probably online where it's basically like a wall stretch, where you kind of lean against the wall and you make sure the heel stays down. Similar to what in yoga they would call a downward dog stretch. Pose, where you're basically stretching the back of your calf, and you feel that calf muscle where you're leaning against the wall, and you obviously never want to overstretch. You just want to feel where you're kind of holding the stretch in where you do feel your muscle and tendons tight, but not over pulling it. Obviously there's bigger muscles in your legs, like quadriceps and hamstrings, that you want to stretch. In terms of feet, you want to bend your toes up and down. Usually a stretch you hold for about 10 seconds. You repeat 3 times, so 30 seconds total. But like I said, combining all the stretches together, it should be about 15, 20 minutes, because you do want to stretch your upper body as well, especially if you're doing regular gym exercises where you are going to be using your upper body. So like I said, stretching is very critical, and there have been studies where the retroactive studies where basically they took a look at injuries that were old, going back 10, 15 years, and they found about 80 to 90% of injuries could be prevented just by stretching. So that's why I'm saying it's very critical that the stretching is done and done properly in order to avoid injury altogether, because it is something that can sideline you and prevent reaching your goals.
Yeah, I agree with you there 100% on the stretching piece of it. Like, it took, when I first went out to the gym before, like working with trainers and working with health professionals, I would just go to the gym and be like, oh, well, I'm here, gonna jump on this machine now. Never really thought about stretching. And once I learned how to properly stretch and the importance of stretching before and after a workout, it really changed my process. It made me enjoy the process of going to the gym more, because I was in less pain after my workout, and I felt better about the workout at the end of the process. So I do agree with you that stretching is very important overall. And now I learned about doing stretches that help my feet, which is also amazing. So thank you for that. We talked about orthotics earlier and getting the right foot support and arch support and things of that nature. How is an orthotic different than an arch support that I can buy at a sporting goods store?
So what we normally do is, and that's what I do, is put your foot in a foam cast in a very specific pattern to simulate your the way you walk, and produce pretty much a neutral cast, meaning that your foot is not neither leaning inward or outward. It's basically foam, so it basically makes an impression of your foot inside. It's a foam box, and from there it's sent to a lab where they basically have a negative imprint, and they pour in the positive and almost make like a copy of your foot. And from there they take, usually it's a plastic, but there could be other materials used, and make a mold around that positive cast. And from that it's basically exactly a copy of your foot where it should be when you put it in, where your arch support is right where your arch is, and basically ball your foot in the heel support. So you get an exact, I would say, copy of your foot in a position where it's supposed to be, versus when you buy something over the counter, it's made for a generic mold, just like a pair of shoes. So it's not exactly fit for you. I mean, based on size, yeah, it fits on size, but then the arch is not necessarily will be in the right place where it should be. Plus, the arch height of the actual orthotic might not be correct for you, where it's keeping you in a straight alignment versus, again, your foot collapsing or going more outward. So the fit is not precise, and therefore it might not work. Again, like I said, for some people which have a more neutral foot type where they're more straight or walking straight, they might be able to get away with it. But for someone with a more severe collapse, let's say, or again, where the foot is more outward, where they're more prone to, let's say, ankle sprains, it might not work because of the fact that the orthotic is not really doing, the prefabricated one, is not really doing the job where it's keeping your foot in the right alignment.
Okay, so definitely the going the way of the orthotics, because it's customized to your feet, sounds like definitely the better way to go, because it's built for your comfort and to ease the stress off your body and your feet altogether. So that sounds like a winner. In terms of, as someone who has family members who struggle with diabetes, and knowing that being a diabetic, there are specific things that you have to be concerned with around your foot. How would you counsel someone who is excited about getting into fitness, but who is diabetic and want to make sure that they're taking care of their feet properly?
That's a great question, actually. Obviously, with diabetes, the person does want to make sure they do exercise, because it's very important to control their blood sugar. The number one thing is obviously they have to have the proper shoes. Again, as we discussed, it's the toe box, which is the front of your shoe, has to have enough space, because a lot of diabetics, according to CDC, actually, 50% of diabetics do have something called some type of peripheral neuropathy. Neuropathy means their nerve endings are not working properly. So basically, they don't have the same sensation as a non-diabetic, where, let's say, any pressure spots or something that hurts a regular person with no diabetes, the diabetic might not actually feel the same sensation, and it might just continue exercising and cause further issues. So it's very critical that the shoes do have enough space where they're not putting pressure in different spots. And as a diabetic person, definitely has to make sure they check their feet daily for any type of redness, blisters, irritations, anything cuts, because this is something that can become very detrimental to their health, in the sense that they might develop anything where this can get infected, or their healing is not as good as well. So it can really cause a lot of problems. So very important to check the feet for any irritation. Obviously, when buying a new pair of shoes, and it's for everybody, you want to make sure you break them in slowly. Meaning, if you're going to do exercise, you can't just buy a pair of shoes and just go and do the exercise. You want to make sure you break them in slowly. An hour or two, just regular walking, running errands, just so you can get acclimated to the shoe, and then use them for exercise. But the other thing with diabetics, they want to always wear diabetic socks. That's critical, and keep their feet dry, especially if someone has their sweaty feet, hyperhidrosis. Maybe even have a second pair of socks that they have, just to make sure, because it can lead to blistering and other things. So socks are important. And also, as diabetics, they want to make sure that they do the workouts that they're comfortable with and start slowly and progress forward, and just make sure that the checking of the feet is very important, that nothing is happening in a sense that it's being detrimental where they can get potentially infection. Nothing's just from working out and blisters and cuts and such.
I appreciate that. Thank you. In terms of diabetic socks, I've never heard of, I haven't heard of diabetic socks before. I'm not a diabetic, so I wouldn't, but can you elaborate a little bit more on what diabetic socks are and how they work?
Basically, usually there's the little seam on top that you would have in normal socks. You know what I'm talking about? Right where the toes are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So usually they don't have that. Why? Because of the fact that, think about it, if your foot is moving around and that seam can actually irritate the toes and cause blistering. So it's more of a seamless sock, and usually it's white and we do recommend white versus any other color, because let's say if you have a cut and it bleeds, when you check, you can see it better versus let's say a sock that's black or something. It's not as visible. So usually that's basically what they are, and they have usually they're moisture wicking socks. So like I said, it's very important to make sure that keep the feet dry.
Right.
So therefore, moisture wicking, where the moisture is absorbed into the sock instead of having it on the foot, can prevent things like blistering. Like I said, because the main thing with diabetics is where for a regular person the cut can heal fairly quickly. With diabetics, it could take longer to heal. A and B. If the blister, let's say, pops and bacteria obviously can get into the skin is a barrier, so if bacteria can get inside, diabetics are more prone to having an infection and also are more prone to having more severe infections, and that usually can lead to very serious effects in general. Meaning, like I remember during residency where somebody would have an infection and didn't take care of it, had to have their toes amputated because the infection progressed so quickly and they didn't do anything about it right away, and it led to amputations. And this is very serious, and this is what we always as podiatrists try to emphasize, especially with diabetics, is that they come and see us quickly and take care of things right away without waiting, because a day or two, which might not seem like a big deal,
right,
can become a very severe problem, especially if their sugar isn't controlled well. And I've seen some very serious consequences, like I said, of literally a day or two difference.
Oh, wow. Well, that's good to know. And it's good to know about what diabetic socks are and how they can definitely help. So thank you for that as well. Outside of your own physical activity that you do on your body, things like cycling and being on machines, and is there special requirements for those too? Should you be wearing specific athletic shoes for that? Or how does that all work?
So I know spinning has become very popular. I think that's one of the things you might be referring to. But
yes.
For spinning, obviously they have a clip-on shoes, or even cycling for outside. People I see use clip-in shoes that basically it's your pedals. Now those usually tend to be a little bit narrow. So in terms of that, you definitely want to make sure that you do have enough wiggle room in your toes, because that's something that could lead to a couple of things that I've seen where sometimes there's a nerve impingement in between the metatarsals, which are the bones right past your toes, where they develop nerve irritation because the shoes are narrow, and this is where it's critical. And then other things like hammer toes, which basically makes the toes curl and keep that way. That's something that can occur. So very critical to have enough toe box, meaning the space within your toe area that your toes are not crammed inside. But for regular persons who just does regular cycling, regular cross trainer shoes or the ones that are not clip-in, that's usually fine, as long as like it's very important. Like I always keep mentioning the toe box. Toe box is very important just to make sure that your toes are not squished. If your toes are squished, it's definitely not a proper sneaker for you, and you definitely want to make sure you have enough space, because otherwise, different types of pains and irritations can develop that can become over time chronic. So it's very critical that you I keep emphasizing that the proper shoe is key.
Agreed. What I'm hearing also is that, listen to your body, right? Listen to your feet. If you're wearing uncomfortable shoes and you're feeling that pain, something is wrong and you need to address it. Don't just ride through it. In some cases, if it's a new shoe, you may need to break it in, like you said, for an hour or two. But if you're consistently breaking the shoe in and you're still in pain, it sounds like you may need to get a new shoe.
Agree. Absolutely.
And now that we are all like in a state of, we're obviously in the pandemic, and we're in a state of slowly opening back up in different phases, and folks are starting to head back to work. We've all been home for some time, either sitting down or walking, but not as much pressure on our feet as you would normally do in your regular day-to-day. Now that we're returning to that, what advice do you have for our listening audience about how they can adjust and return to their normal activities on their feet?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, number one thing is, it's still summer, and people, like to wear flip-flops, and shoes don't have a lot of, they're flatter and don't have a lot of support. Now, as you start walking, if you use those type of shoes, things like plantar fasciitis, like we discussed earlier, the heel pain and Achilles is very common that it can just occur because we're sedentary and then starting to walk more. So obviously, you want to wear something with a little bit of a wedge heel or something that's not flat in terms of back, front of your foot towards the heel. Obviously, if you're exercising, like we said, the sneakers is key, proper sneaker, and obviously starting slowly. Again, I said, 0 to 90 is never going to be something that's will last you a long time and will sideline you and prevent you from exercise. So slowly, let's say, if you want to run a mile today, then increase to 2. So really key is taking your time and not jumping into your old routine that you normally did, because you are not used to it anymore, and neither is your body. So you really want to make sure and that you go in a slow pattern to adjust back to your old activities, and that's important. So that's basically the keys of not getting injured, and obviously stretching, like we again said before. That's basically what you have to do.
I appreciate that, Dr. Genkin. Again, stretching and making sure that you ease into your routine is going to be the safest and most comfortable way to get back to what you used to do, especially where your feet are concerned. Dr. Genkin, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your expertise with our listening audience. Can you tell our audience where they can find you on the internet or on the web if they want to talk to you more and ask more questions?
Absolutely. So you can visit my website, elite, ELITE, footcarenyNJ.com. There's phone numbers there, along with the office addresses that I see patients in. You can always give me a call. I always try to get people in as soon as possible, especially if you have any injuries. As soon as you have the time, I'll get you in, and we can discuss anything further. And you can always call me at the numbers that are provided there, and if you have any questions. Absolutely.
Again, Dr. Genkin, thank you so much for being here. Audience, you're listening to Wellness on Demand. Until next time, check us out on Instagram at WellnessOD and like us on Facebook at WellnessOD.
You've been listening to Wellness on Demand with Garvin Reid. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or listen to past episodes, visit www.wellnessod.com.